Welcome to the Pushing Beauty podcast. This is Michelle Diavella, and these are words from my soul. This is episode 3 of the Desert Diaries, a sub-series of the Pushing Beauty podcast. So this is a more somber topic. I guess the last episode was a little bit similar. I was driving back from New Mexico with a friend of mine after a retreat at my breathwork teacher's place. And it's about a 10.5-hour drive from New Mexico to Wonder Valley. And we drove all the way there. I drove actually because I drive stick and my friend doesn't, so I was driving the whole way. So on the way home we decided to stop in Flagstaff and kind of cut the trip up a little bit. It's about a halfway point, and we're about 30 minutes. We had spent the morning in Flagstaff, the night before in Flagstaff, which by the way is a super cute, quaint little kind of mountain town that I was very pleasantly surprised by. And it'd just been a very long weekend. We were on retreat for about 4 days and had spent, the extra day in Flagstaff and had done a lot of healing. And both of us were pretty much ready to, quote unquote, get back to our lives. And we were 30 minutes from my house, and you have to go down this very long desert road to get to my place. And it's the only road, it's the only way, the only access point. And about 30 minutes before we would have approached my house, we were passed by a police officer who put his lights on after he passed me, which I was like, that's a little bit strange. And then about maybe 5 minutes ahead of us, we approached a line of cars that were lined up behind essentially what looked like it might have been an accident. There was a fire truck and several police officers and a bunch of people just standing outside on the road, which usually is a sign that people have been there for a little bit. And so we pull up, and my friend ends up finding out that, there was an accident. And so I just kind of parked the car on the road and got out, and we were talking to people. And, immediately my reaction was not to focus on, the situation we were in, but to send just love and healing to whoever was involved in the accident. And I just want to say that could sound a little bit obnoxious, but this is definitely not who I've always been. I definitely in the past would have been immediately focused on what am I going to do? What's the situation going to be like for me? And obviously coming off of a healing retreat made it a little bit easier, but I've just done, so much healing work and so much work on my relationship to myself and my relationship to life that it felt really good to honor and acknowledge that my first instinct was to focus on the seriousness of the situation that people were in. And so we said some prayers, we sent some love. I had some offerings in my car from my teacher that I had just bought. And so we put some intentions into the offering and buried it on the land, and found out that it was serious. People had been on the scene who were bloodied, and they were waiting for a helicopter to get there. So we decided that we would wait, because the alternative was to go, more than 2 hours out of our way. We'd had to go a big, huge circle around the mountains to get to the other side of my house. So we decided we needed to stay. We were very grateful to have food and water. And the last episode, I spoke a little bit about, the seriousness of the desert. And, we were on this long road. It was very hot outside, probably in the 90s, maybe even 100, I'm not sure. and had been on a road trip. And I also have some supplies in my car. So thankfully we had plenty of food and water. And, we were in a situation where we had enough gas. Again, I've been really cautious about making sure I have all the supplies I need in case something like this were to happen. And we ended up waiting for an hour and a half in between being in the car, keeping the AC on a little bit, and then being outside, stretching our legs after having been on the road for over 5 hours already. And we saw 2 helicopters come to airlift people out, and then unfortunately found out that a woman died on the scene. And I later found out, just doing some research, that it was a 32-year-old woman who was crossing or passing a car. It sounds like maybe she didn't have enough time to pass, and that she also went off the road, maybe went off the pavement into the dirt, the sand on the side, and then the car went back into the road and hit a mother and her 2 children head on. And the woman, the 32-year-old woman who was the one who was passing, died on the scene. And from what we found out, the children and the mother on location that day, we found out that they were all alive when they were put in the helicopter and airlifted. The newspaper article I read said that one of the children was in critical condition. I haven't been able to find any additional information since then. But that day we found out that a woman had died. And that's all we knew, is that a woman had died and that her body was stuck in the car. They couldn't get her out, and that it had become a crime scene, and there would be an investigation before the scene would be cleared. So we had been there for about an hour and a half, and obviously sending love and prayers. And it's horrible to, these things happen all the time, and to be in a situation where you're sitting there, waiting to find out if everybody's okay, and not knowing the people and not knowing the situation and why things had happened. So we were obviously affected by it. And then decided that we probably should leave and not risk waiting any longer, because it was getting later, and it would be a very long drive, And so it was a very long drive. It took us about 3 hours to get home from there after waiting for an hour and a half and then being on the road for 5 hours. And, for the first hour and a half, I was pretty exhausted. I had been driving all day and then had a really long weekend, like I had mentioned. And then the sun started to go down. And I have never seen a sunset like this before. I mean, unfortunately, I was driving, but looking in my rearview mirror, the sky was on fire. It was like this. I've seen fiery sky sunsets before, but I have never, ever seen anything like this. It was just like blazing sky. The whole sky was just covered in pinks and oranges and reds and yellows. And my friend and I were just, talking about life and the fragility of life, and, feeling so much appreciation, so much gratitude for our lives. And we were talking about how we were ready to be, like I said in the very beginning, getting back to our lives, quote unquote, getting back to our lives. And I just felt so much contentment for my life driving home, just all the things that I want, all the things that I've experienced, who I am, where I'm at, everything is exactly the way that it needs to be. I am so grateful for everything that I've experienced, the highs, the lows, and just had this feeling exactly where I was, not even just who I am in this moment in time, but where I was driving down that road in that car with that person, in that specific place, seeing that sunset. It was exactly where I needed to be. And in that moment, just feeling this deep knowing that everything is just what it needs to be. Everything is perfect as it is. And after the sun went down, we were on this road where, like, you know, it's almost sort of like a roller coaster where you get to the top and you can hardly see in front of you and these kind of dips. And we had come up one part of the hill, and I just was like in awe. In front of me was the most gigantic full moon I have ever seen in my life. So moments before, the most incredible sunset. And then after that, the most incredible full moon. And so I looked it up online because the moon was gigantic. And I've seen the moon large before, where it looks just strangely large, like not even really real. And I knew it has something to do with the horizon. I wasn't sure exactly what it was, but it's called like a moon illusion. Like the moon illusion, I think is what it's called if you look it up online. But the moon was freaking gigantic. It was so huge, and it was like this vibrant orange, and there were just a couple of clouds sort of right in the middle of it. And it seriously is the most spectacular full moon I have ever seen in my life. And so I put on Tom Petty's Free Fallin', and we opened the sunroof and just let that really sweet, warm desert night air in, and sang at the top of our lungs and did a little dancing in the car. And then the rest of the hour and a half drive home, we were just playing, you know, hits from the 80s and the 90s and singing and dancing and just being in the moment and feeling joy and gratitude for our lives. And so I wrote 2 posts on Instagram. If you happen to follow me on Instagram, I'll put them in the show notes as well. One was in process as we were at the scene of the accident, and then one was a reflection afterwards. And I ended up writing a newsletter as well. I will also put a link to get access to my newsletter, which I send out every Monday morning. And I got a lot of emails. The newsletter article was called Someone Near Me Died. And I basically talked about how, you know, like life is so fragile and precious. And sometimes we don't, we get lost and we don't appreciate exactly where we are in this moment in time. And, you know, you might be at a period of time in your life where things are feeling really, really hard. And I've totally been there as well. I have my moments still too. But whenever things like this happens, you know, it really just makes me recognize how lucky I am, how privileged I am, how I really do feel that I'm here for a reason, and reconnects me to my purpose and my intentions for my life. And I also want to mention that I'm somebody who has been very, 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 I don't even know if fascinated is the right word. I would even maybe say haunted. I've been very haunted by death for most of my life. I remember being really young and just talking to my mom. We would just like talk for hours. Sometimes she would come in when I was young and, you know, say goodnight to me, and we would end up getting in these long conversations about death. And my mind had always had a very difficult time grasping, coming to terms with death. The fact that, you know, we don't really know what happens. Most of us don't really know what happens after this. And there had been a lot of contemplation, and that's a big part of what led me to, you know, seek out some spiritual answers in my early 20s. And my mom had actually bought me a book around that time by Thich Nhat Hanh called No Death, No Fear, which is one that I would really recommend. I recommended it to my friend in the car after the accident because we were having a similar conversation. And it's definitely one I would still recommend today. I'll also link that in the show notes. But my relationship to death, you know, it began as something that was like, I can't understand it. I can't understand it. You know, like how is somebody here one moment and then gone the next? And I would even like see people post things on Facebook. Like I didn't even know the person. And they'd say like my friend passed away or something, or my husband, never came home, and some horrible stories of, ways that people have lost loved ones. And I would like become obsessed and sort of like start stalking the person who passed away and just like look at the last post that they had written. And I did, thinking similarly to this woman in the car, one of my first thoughts was like, what was she doing before? Where was she going? Who was she on her way to see? Where had she just left? What was she thinking about, just before? Because there is this part of my mind that has a hard time with, one moment you're here and the next minute you're not. But I will say that through breath work and my spiritual practice over the past 5 years, my relationship to death has dramatically changed. And, unfortunately, I've lost quite a few people fairly early on in my life. I've lost 2 grandparents. I've lost 3 grandparents, but 2 of whom were very, very close, like second parents, when I was like 16. And then I lost close friends in high school from drug overdose. One of my best friends died from cystic fibrosis when I was like 22, and aunts and other family members. So I've definitely had my fair share of grieving and coming head to head with death in terms of people in my life. Fortunately, I haven't dealt with any serious health issues myself, or I did get in a car accident when I was 17 in a semi head-on collision. It was like pretty bad. I was 17 and had been driving across a highway, and it was technically not my fault, but was my fault when you live in a small town, and that's a whole other story. But there was a woman with a pregnant woman with 3 kids in a van, who I hit, and their car flipped over, and I got out of the car in complete shock and fell to my knees in the middle of this highway and thought they were dead. I mean, it was probably one of the most traumatic situations I've ever been in my life. And thankfully they all survived and were completely fine. And I was fine. So incredibly grateful for that to have turned out the way that it did. Through my practices and through my contemplations and my work on trusting in life, I have definitely developed a healthier relationship to death, where I feel like I trust more and accept more. And I'm also at a place in my life where I feel like I'm doing what I'm here to be doing. And I think for so much of my life, I was haunted by this feeling like I'm here to do something and I don't know what it is. And it left me in a lot of pain, which again, if you know my story at all, discovering breathwork was a big part. Obviously I teach breathwork, but it's not all that I do. And breathwork was the tool that transformed my life. And I would also say my teacher, David Elliott. And so through my transformation, I've come to know who I am, to know my purpose, to be really aligned in doing the things that I know I'm here to do. And I think if I didn't have that, it would be a much more difficult thing for me to think about my life ending. So, yeah, I mean, this is probably a little bit of a random podcast, but I felt like it was an important one because I had been getting so many responses about the writing that I had done. And just, I know that people are in so many different places in their lives. Some of you have maybe faced death yourself. Some of you have, lost loved ones, people very close to you. And, that type of grief that type of grief of losing a loved one and then moving on with your life, I think is one of the most challenging things that we have to do in our lives, is come to terms with death and find a way to embrace it and honor the life process through it. So I hope that, this has any little impact on you today. Maybe you will contemplate a little bit more why you're here, and maybe send out some love to some people in your life that maybe you don't express love to as much as you want. Now is the opportunity to do it. It's only right now. It's only ever right now. And maybe there's somebody that you need to forgive. Maybe you need to forgive yourself. Maybe there's somebody that you're unwilling to forgive in your life. And a lot of times when we look at death, this is actually one of the really beautiful things about having contemplated death through most of my life, is that it always brings me back to what's most important. And it helps me let go of the things that I'm holding on to that are keeping me out of love and connection. So I hope this maybe served as a little nudge, a little gentle reminder that life is precious and so valuable. Thank you for listening, and I hope to have you with me next time.